Dread Delusion is a fantastic game that I have a lot of thoughts about. But if you decide to leave the video quickly, I hope you'll at least hear this one. It's really good. Try not to compare it to the Elder Scrolls. Dread Delusion is a first-person, retro-styled action role-playing game. It was developed by Lovely Hellplace and released on PC into early access in June of 2022, with the full release in May of 2024. In this video, I will talk about the game, but I will attempt to avoid spoilers so that you can still enjoy the game for yourself if you haven't already played it. There's a quote from Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, that's the 26th President of the United States for those without Wikipedia handy, that says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." It means that if you're always looking at what another person has, you'll never be happy with your own life. Personally, I've always thought that telling poor people to just be happy with what they've got is a tool to keep them down, quiet and content, slaving for the benefit of their corporate masters, born only to sweat, bleed, and die in obscurity like the stupid piece of shit that you are. But what I have found is that this saying is true in the context of video games. It's difficult to talk about games without comparing them to the ones that came before. It's a lot easier if I could point to an experience that we've both shared and say, it's kinda like that. But it's also a little unfair to the new game because often we're not just comparing the mechanics or the aesthetics, but the context that we played them in. As humans, I don't think that we're very good at separating those things. This could devolve into another weird tangent, this time about context effects and how our environment influences our perceptions of our experiences, but I'm just some guy who likes to talk about video games, and I think you get the point. How could any game affect me again as deeply as the first time I left the vault in Fallout 3? How could a new shooter compare to the feeling of staying up until sunrise at a Halo 2 LAN party with all of my friends? I'm comparing new games to these experiences in the back of my head whether I want to or not, and it's affecting how I feel about them. On top of the emotional context, our memories of a game often leave out the frustrations or boredoms, and our imaginations fill in the gaps left by older graphics. You've probably seen it all over the internet or even felt it yourself. Gaming just doesn't hit the way that it used to. New games aren't as good. Maybe I'm getting too old for gaming. These are becoming more and more common sentiments as we get older, and if we're not careful, it can be easy to put the onus for those feelings on the game itself instead of our shifting perspectives towards them. When I was a kid with no job and even fewer responsibilities, every new game was a fresh experience. I didn't have to weigh the cost of the game against my groceries or the guilt of my backlog. I also didn't have to worry about it respecting my time because I had time in abundance. But now, a 100-hour game is a burden, and grinding levels is spending my time making no tangible progress in a story, accomplishing essentially nothing, because a game designer decided that that would make the game more, enjoyable? No, I think it's because 100 hours long looks good to the marketing department. Speaking of story, I have a list of tropes in my brain a mile long, so the surprises come less and less often. The dopamine drip is slowing no matter what that shiny new game does, but it's still being compared, not even to the older games themselves, but to what I think the older game was. If a new game came out today that was just as good as our favorite games were then, it wouldn't be seen as good by today's standards. It takes a totally different level of drug to get us the same amount of high. With the way life's going for most of us, I don't know if we'll ever get that high again. That's a huge burden to put on a piece of media. Every game that comes out has to live up to the legacy of its father or be considered a total failure. Dread Delusion is most commonly compared to the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, and that's a comparison that sets it up to fail. Morrowind is a fantastic game. For many OG gamers, it's a landmark in Western RPGs and a fundamental piece of a lot of childhoods. It's one of the 3 reasons that some people actually thought Starfield would not be dog shit. I'm in my mid-30s. My first experience with Morrowind was on the original Xbox. I bought it again on the Xbox One for backwards compatibility. I've still never even played the PC version. That's not really relevant to the story. Sometimes I just like to disgust the PC master race. The point is that I have to be aware of that history when someone compares a new game to Morrowind because I've already stepped off of that boat and just stood there. awestruck by the alien fantasy world with its insanely realistic graphics and majestic creatures. So what is Dread Delusion? Well, it's kinda like Morrowind, but that's really just the surface. You've got your Mushroom Forest and your Dwemer Ruins and a little bit of Ash Mountain. If I had to point to other influences, I would say it reminds me more of Warhammer 40k. Now, I've never played Warhammer 40k, and I've struggled to get into the games themselves, but the universe it's set in is captivating to me. This game takes place in a miserable, post-apocalyptic shithole floating above a ruined planet. The dark corners of the world are filled with the rotting corpses of long-dead gods. There's also a little sprinkle of System Shock in there, and the body horror and the machinery. I love it. Give me a wasteland filled with horrors beyond comprehension and I'm like a possum in a dumpster. But that's still just aesthetic, so let's talk mechanics. Skill checks are a simple number comparison. You can influence them with your equipment, and you allocate points by leveling up. There's no experience in the game though. You advance by collecting floating blue skulls known as Delusions, either through exploration or by completing quests. Lockpicking and trap disarming is a 6-sided die roll driven by those same stats. Alchemy only has like 4 ingredients, which I really appreciate because I have never been able to care about alchemy in any game. There's almost no character customization. You never even see your hands. When you make your character, you can choose from a few background options, but don't stress about them too much. The boosts from your clothing make it so that you can do just about everything. Combat is easy, and magic isn't terribly useful, so I recommend focusing on lockpicking and charm, but it doesn't really matter. Since I already let the Khajiit out of the bag, the thing I've seen most people complaining about online is the combat system. I do think that's a fair complaint, but let's look at the competition real quick. Yeah, it's gonna be hard to beat that. Alright, that's a joke. The real weakness of Double D's combat is the lack of progression and options. There are only 3 melee weapons. You upgrade them with ore you find throughout the world, and they don't really play very differently. The magic feels limp in comparison to the melee, and you don't recharge mana passively, so you have to drink a potion if you want to cast more. Spells can be awkward to aim, they don't really track enemies as far as I can tell, and the enemies themselves just run at you most of the time. That's always kind of a bummer to me, because I love playing a caster in RPGs, but if I can only use a few spells per fight, they need to do a lot of lifting. I can cast Swing the Sword infinitely, even when my stamina is empty, so that's what I wound up doing. Ranged combat is fairly pointless. I think the devs must have felt the same because they give you arrows in the tutorial, but you can only find one bow in the game. It's pretty far in and it's easy to miss. By the time you do upgrade that bow enough to be useful, you're already used to not using it. You can sell the throwables and the arrows though if you need more money. All of this comes together to form a very simple combat system. You'll be solving the enemy health bar problem in largely one way, and it does get repetitive. It's also not hard by any stretch. Personally, I'm fine with that. I think the game wanted to focus on exploration, and as much as I love the FromSoft games, I treat difficulty like spicy food. I like it when I want it, and when it's well done. I don't want spicy popcorn or ice cream, and I don't always want difficult combat. Most days, I just want to run around, kill a monster, and move on with my life. You don't level up through combat in the game anyway, so running away is a simple solution to many of life's problems. There's a joke in there where I would say, ask my dad, but fortunately my dad's a cool guy, so never mind, I guess.
Love my dad. My dad's awesome.
I do have one word of caution. I have a tendency to want to see how far I can go in a game without following the main quest. I broke out of the introduction area through a side door and started exploring, and it didn't really handle that very well. I didn't have any soft locking problems, but I guess you could say I went from quest step 1 to 4, and then NPCs wouldn't talk to me because they were waiting for me to do something that could no longer be done, or dialogue just wouldn't trigger the next quest step. Eventually, I reached a point where it cleared itself out though, so don't feel like you have to restart if this happens to you. The thing that I love most about Dread Delusion is its writing. Not necessarily the moment-to-moment dialogue, though that's fine too. I'm talking about the way it handles its ethical dilemmas. Don't worry, there isn't a morality system, I'm just talking about player choices. In almost every game with player-driven decisions, the options are fairly polar. At best, you can pick if you want to play a character as good or evil. If I'm playing a good character in Infamous, then there's not really any question if I should share the supply drop with the people or keep it all for myself. Should I blow up Megaton in Fallout 3 so that a rich guy can have a nicer view from his balcony? Even BioShock, which I hold up as an amazing game, didn't follow through on the implications of its moral dilemmas. It tells you that you can kill the little sisters for a lot of Adam or spare them for less. But if you do spare them, then they give you a present with bonus Adam instead, which almost makes up for the difference. When's the last time you were playing a game and you couldn't tell what the good option was? That's the shit I'm talking about. There is more ethical tension in a single round of Papers, Please than 100 hours of most RPGs. Dread Delusion is one of very few games to give me a trolley problem, and I don't really know what the good answer is. And it does this several times, but I don't want to spoil them. Suffice it to say, I had to sit at the final choice for a minute and just think, what should I do here? It's not a feeling that I get often enough. In the end, I don't even know if I made the right choice. I didn't go back to see what happens if I go the other way. That tale is over. In my East Shade video, I said that my favorite types of games are the ones in which I can visit strange and distant lands, where I still wonder what I'll see next, where I can meet new people, hear a new story, and see a new sky. Dread Delusion is that game, and I loved it. The main story is only around 10 hours, but I spent well over 30 poking around every corner I could find. If it interests you, give it a chance, and keep an open mind. After all, that's where the delusions go. As always, thanks for watching. Later.